The cross. It was meant to horrify the world. It was meant for humiliation. It was meant to last for days. It was meant for slow asphyxiation. It was meant to prolong torture.
It was the Roman soldier's job. It was meant to be used by Caesar, but instead, it was used by God.
Meant to stop a movement, but instead, it became the way. It was meant to act on fear, but instead, it awakened faith.
It was meant to be vicious and violent, but instead, it became our peace. It was meant to uproot hope, but instead, it became our seeds.
It was meant to punish captives, but instead, it unleashed freedom. It was meant to build up Rome, but instead, it built God's kingdom.
It was meant to discourage rebels. It was meant to stop insurrection. It was meant to put down Jesus. But instead, it set up his resurrection. It was meant to jeer and mock him, but instead, it was his glory. It was meant to erase a chapter, but instead, it became the story.
It was meant to hold up convicts, but instead, it raised up a king. It was meant to shut our mouths, but instead, it's why we sing.
It was meant to be a judgment, but instead it became our mercy. It is why the song of heaven is the Lamb. The Lamb is worthy.
It was meant to kill an enemy, crush dissenters and diversions, but instead it became the banner of God's love for every person.
It was meant to be appalling, nailing hands and feet to wood. It was meant to be used for evil, but instead it was used for good.
It was meant to be a symbol of God's assassination, but instead, it became the symbol of his invitation.
Come to the cross.
Instead of sin and stain, you are meant to be made clean. Instead of being forgotten, you are made to know your sin.
Instead of being ashamed, you can leave behind your guilt. Instead of feeling empty, you were meant to be fulfilled.
Instead of being broken, you are meant to be made whole. Here, Calvary is calling. It beckons you behold.
Come to the cross.
Instead of being an accident, you have a purpose and a plan. Instead of being abandoned, you were chosen by his hand.
For all who've said I can't, God has said I can. No matter what you've done, the invitation stands. Come to the cross.
Instead of being doubtful, you are meant to know your Father. You are meant to be his son, and you are meant to be his daughter.
You are cherished from the start. You are always in the picture. Instead of being a victim, you are meant to be a victor. The result of Jesus' blood, salvation has arrived.
And instead of being dead, you are meant to be alive.
The
cross.
It was meant to signal death.
But instead, it's a sign of living.
It was meant to be the end.
But instead, it's our beginning.